of you have read this book, but for the three of you who haven't, it's about a traveling Shakespearean theater company in a post-apocalyptic North America. And I think I'm going to read just for about 5 to 10 minutes, and then we'll jump into conversation. I don't think there's much you need to know for this reading selection. One thing, I'm going to read a section where they're rehearsing King Lear, walking down the road, so you'll hear some dialogue from that. An incomplete list. No more diving into pools of chlorinated water, like green from below. No more ball games played out under floodlights. No more porch lights with moths fluttering on summer nights. No more trains running under the surface of cities on the dazzling power of the electric third rail. No more cities. No more films, except rarely, except the generator drowning out half the dialogue. And only then for the first little while, until the fuel for the generators ran out, because automobile gas goes stale after 2 or 3 years. No more screens shining in the half-light as people raise their phones above the crowd to take photographs of concert stages. No more concert stages lit by candy-colored halogens. No more electronica on electric guitars. No more pharmaceuticals. No more certainty of surviving, a scratch on one's hand, a cut on a finger while chopping vegetables for dinner, a dog bite. No more flight. No more towns glimpsed from the sky through airplane windows, points of glimmering light. No more looking down from 30,000 feet and imagining the lives lit up by those lights at that moment. No more airplanes. No more requests for a tray table in its upright aloft position. But no, this wasn't true. There were still airplanes here. They stood dormant on runways and hangs. They collected snow on their wings. In the cold months, they were ideal for food storage. In summer, the ones near orchards were filled with trays of fruit that dehydrated in the heat. Teenagers snuck into them to have sex. Rust blossomed on the street. No more countries, all borders unmet. No more internet. No more social media. No more scrolling through litanies of dreams and nervous hopes and photographs of lunches. Cries for help and expressions of contentment and relationship status updates with heart icons full or broken. Plans to meet up later. Pleas, complaints, desires. Pictures of babies dressed as bears or peppers for Halloween. No more reading and commenting on the lives of others, and in so doing, feeling slightly less alone in their rhythm. No more avatars. 20 years after the end of air travel, the caravans of the traveling symphony moved slowly under a white-hot sky. It was the end of July, and the 25-year-old thermometer affixed to the back of the lead caravan read 106 Fahrenheit, 41 Celsius. They were near Lake Michigan. They couldn't see it from them. Trees pressed in close at the sides of the road and erupted through cracks in the pavement. Saplings bending under the caravans, and soft leaves brushing the legs of horses and symphony away. The heat wave persisted for a relentless week. Most of them were on foot to reduce the load on the horses. They had to be rested in the shade more frequently than anyone would have liked. The symphony didn't know this territory well and wanted to be done with it, but speed was impossible in this heat. They walked slowly with weapons in hand, the actors running their lines and the musicians trying to ignore the actors, scouts watching for danger ahead and behind on the road. It's not a bad test, the director had said earlier in the day. Gil was 72 years old, riding in the back of the second caravan now, his legs not quite what they used to be. If you can remember your lines in questionable territory, he said, you'll be fine on stage. Enter Lear, Kirsten said. 20 years earlier, in a life she mostly couldn't remember, she had had a small, non-speaking role in a short-lived Toronto production of King Lear. Now she walked in sandals whose soles had been cut from an automobile tire, 3 knives in her belt. She was carrying a paperback version of the play. The stage directions highlighted in yellow. Mad, she said, continuing with the stage directions, fantastically dressed with wild flowers. comes here, the man learning the part of dead person. His name was August, and he had only recently taken to acting. He was the second violin in the secret room, which is to say that no one in the symphony knew he wrote poetry, except Kirsten and the seventh guitar. The safer sense will never accommodate. Line is master thus, Kirsten said. Cheers, he said. The safer sense will never accommodate his master thus. The caravans had once been pickup trucks, but now they were pulled by teams of horses on wheels of steel and wood. All of the pieces rendered useless by the end of gasoline had been removed. The engine, the fuel supply system, all of the other components that no one under the age of 20 had ever seen in operation. And a bench had been installed on top of each cab for the drivers. The cabs were stripped of everything that added excess weight but left otherwise intact, with doors that closed and windows of difficult-to-break automobile glass. Because when they were traveling through fraught territory, it was nice to have somewhere relatively safe to put the children. The main structure of the caravans had been built into pickup beds, tarps lashed over frames. The tarps on all three caravans were painted gunmetal gray, with the Traveling Symphony lettered in white on both sides. No, they cannot touch me for coining, Dieter said over his shoulder. He was learning the part of Lear, although he wasn't really old enough. He walked a little ahead of the other actors, murmuring to his favorite horse. The horse, Bernstein, was missing half his tail because the first cello had just restrung his bow last week. Oh, August said, thou side-piercing sight. You know what's side-piercing? The third trumpet muttered, listening to King Lear 3 times in a row in a heat wave. You know what's even more side-piercing? Alexandra was 15, the symphony's youngest actor. They'd found her on the road as a baby, traveling for 4 days between towns on the far edge of the territory. We'll be in St. Deborah by the water in a couple of hours, Gil said. There's absolutely nothing to worry about. What was lost in the collapse? Almost everything, almost everyone, but there is still such beauty. Twilight in the altered world, a performance of a Midsummer Night's Dream in a parking lot in the mysteriously named town of St. Deborah by the water, Lake Michigan shining a half-mile away. Kirsten is Titania, a crown of flowers on her close-cropped hair, the jagged scar on her cheekbone half erased by candlelight. The audience is silent. Saeed, another actor, circling her in a tuxedo that Kirsten found in Dead Man's Closet near the town of East Jordan. Terry, rash wanton, am I not thy lord? Then I must be thy lady. Lines of a play written in 1594, the year London's theaters reopened after 2 seasons of play. Or written possibly a year later, in 1595, a year before the death of Shakespeare's only son. Some centuries later, on a distant continent, Kirsten moves across the stage in a cloud of painted fabric, half in rage, half in love. She wears a wedding dress that she scavenged from a house near New Petoskey, the chiffon and silk streaked with shades of blue from a child's watercolor cake. But with thy brawls, she continues, thou hast disturbed our sport. She never feels more alive than at these moments. When on stage, she fears nothing. Therefore the winds, piping to us in vain, as in revenge, have sucked up from the sea contagious fogs. Pestilential, a note in the text explains, next to the word contagious, in Kirsten's favorite of the 3 versions of the text that the symphony carries. Shakespeare was the third born to his parents, but the first to survive infancy. 3 of his siblings died young. His son, Hamnet, died at 11 and left behind a twin. Plague closed the theaters again and again, death flickering over the landscape. And now in a twilight once more lit by candles, the age of electricity having come and gone, Titania turns to face her fairy king. Therefore the moon, the governess of floods, pale in her anger, washes all the air, but rheumatic diseases do abound. Oberon watches her with his entourage of fairies. Titania speaks as if to herself now, Oberon forgotten.
Her voice carries high and clear over the silent audience, over the string section waiting for their cue on stage left. And through this distemperature, we see the seasons alter. All three caravans of the traveling symphony are labeled as such. The traveling symphony, lettered in white on both sides. But the lead caravan carries an additional line of text, because survival is insufficient. Thank you.
Hi.
Song? Hi.
That couldn't have worked out better, because that was literally the first thing I was going to ask you.
Perfect.
Wonderful. Yeah, that was beautiful. We played that. It's like we planned it. Survival is not enough.
Right. That was my idea.
Let's talk about that.
Okay.
One, just as a statement about the whole book, and then two, where that statement comes from.
It comes from Star Trek Voyager, which it was an episode I saw when I was, I think, 19 or 20. And it just struck me as a really elegant way of expressing something that I believe to be true. And, you see it anywhere you look on Earth, that people play musical instruments in refugee camps, and they put on plays in war zones. And it's because survival isn't efficient. It's not sufficient, I mean. It's not enough to just have shelter and food and water. It seems to me that we're always looking for something more, and that was what I was trying to get across in the book.
And because of that, we're taken on this journey through post-apocalyptic,
Uh-huh.
and it's beautiful. And
Thank you.
just for the record, I just want to rate for a second. This book, for the three of you who haven't read it yet, it's fantastic.
You know who
it's
you are.
It's an incredible book, and which we'll get to later because of all the different parts. But
Okay.
I wanted to touch then on we're talking about Star Trek quote here,
Sure.
and then I wanted to talk about theater. Were you yourself a theater kid?
I was not, but I was a dance kid, which I think is pretty similar. I'd go to all these dance competitions starting when I was about 6. And it wasn't like toddlers and tiaras or anything crazy like that. But, I just spent so much time as a kid in ballet studios, and I took it really seriously. That was actually my first extremely impractical career. I was a contemporary dancer before I started writing seriously. So I did spend a lot of time backstage and in theaters, and then later when I came to New York, I married my husband, and he mostly writes short fiction at this point, but his background is as a playwright. He had a couple of plays produced, so that gave me kind of a glancing familiarity with the way off-Broadway theater world, which was something I really kind of wanted to write about in this book. Not necessarily off-Broadway in particular, but the lives of these actors who work very hard with very little recognition and are very good. And it's just a really interesting kind of gritty world that I think I'll probably write more about. I was drawn to it.
I like that you're like, just off-Broadway and how devoted they are to their craft and how hard they work. And you're like, also, just like, let's just add a bunch of, violence.
Yeah. Let's kill everybody.
Right. You're just like, imagine, now granted, you're scraping to survive.
Right,
you're
right.
living on that actor's salary, which ain't much.
And there's been a pandemic.
Yeah, exactly. And almost all the world is dead. And
you can do anything.
And it is, I mean, you had, one of the things that really drew me in was, it was so clear that you had performed, or at least that you had been around that world, because it was this way of how performance is distracting.
Right, that's interesting.
And it just seemed like no matter what was happening, no matter what terrible thing was happening, there's always going to be that show.
Right.
And so we've talked about, that's one little section of this book.
Right.
And that's it's very, right, the line, post-apocalyptic Shakespeare traveling troops.
Yeah.
And it's great.
That's the elevator pitch, but there's just, there's a lot. So much of it takes place before the apocalypse. There's a whole Hollywood section. The elevator pitch is always the one tiny section of the book that.
Right, but now let's talk, because let's just talk.
Okay.
It's rarely that you get to finish a book you love and then you get to talk about
That's
it.
true.
So what drew you to this? Because there was almost there was these group of people who were working for no fame.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's this deep, I found it just as page-turning, no violence, but just critique or look at what it means to be famous. And what drew you to that?
I've been interested interested in celebrity culture for a while. I just find it really strange and fascinating the way we build up these actors and then wait for them to fall. There's something kind of gross about it. It's really compelling. And, you know, it's strange. I feel like with these celebrity gossip websites, for example, it's almost as if people are reading chapters of a continuing story. It's like they forget that these are actually real human beings with real human problems. So it was something I wanted to write about just because it's so strange and fascinating to me. And when I first started thinking about this book, I thought it would be a pre-apocalyptic book, just about the life of an actor. So I kind of had that.
Sorry.
Let me
We did
back up.
apocalypse
Okay.
at the very end? I didn't know. I just want to know what
No,
pre-apocalypse
like
is.
not post-apocalyptic.
Okay.
Yeah.
Non-apocalyptic.
Not non-apocalyptic.
Okay.
Yeah.
Keep going.
Okay. Right. So I had this idea from the very beginning that it would be interesting to write about the life of an actor and to write about fame and how it affects him. And then at the same time, I was also thinking about how it would be interesting to write a book that was post-apocalyptic. And this is a way of doing both, having it move back and forth in time from a time that's more or less the present day to 20 years following the collapse when this company is out on the road.
Well, first off, you pulled it off.
Thank you.
It's a nice word. Because the next question. Like, I feel like very often in these kinds of interviews, somebody's just like, well, tell me, like, what brought you, or how did you write the book? It's like this. But, like, seriously, because there is such complicated movement of time.
Mm-hmm.
And in fact, I am jealous of how you did place it kind of in today. But
Right.
when you fade in and fade to the future, it's all still at the same time almost timeless. So I was just wondering, like, not to be so boring, but you're like, all right, I'm gonna write the post-apocalyptic book, I'm gonna write the Hollywood book and like tie them together, or how did you?
No, I jumped back and forth the whole way. I've used more or less that structure for all of my books, and it's just a structure I really like. I find it really interesting to write nonlinear narratives and figure out how to put those pieces together. My idea with my first novel that I've kind of carried through with the three that followed was that it's interesting to have a book that moves not forward toward a particular point in time, but toward the particular moments of, I guess, greatest tension in the plot, even if those happen to be two moments that take place 10 or 20 years apart in sort of in the timeline of the book. So I like jumping around in time like that. And it has a really nice practical effect, which is that when you're completely stuck in one section and you have no idea where you're going, you can just switch to the other. Come back later and figure it out. So,
Go tinker over here for a
yeah,
little while.
exactly, yeah.
I don't
Yeah.
quite get what's going on with this love thing.
Precisely,
but I
yeah,
can-
yeah. It takes an enormous amount of revision to make it seamless, or, hopefully seamless. Yeah, and I had color-coded maps on my wall with like,
Wait, no, more about
okay,
that.
more about the maps. Okay, yeah, it was an Excel file. And I think I put it together when I first started revising the book, so as soon as I had a complete first draft, because there are just so many moving parts. I have all of these characters, and it's jumping all over the place in time. And I just couldn't keep it all straight. I had to have some kind of list. And that having a list of chapters and who has the point of view in each chapter and where you are in time was really helpful in balancing out the book. You could look at it and say, okay, it's been 10 chapters since we've heard from character X, so I need to reorder things a little bit so the reader hasn't forgotten about him by the time we come back to him. So, yeah, it was hugely helpful to have that.
So it's like part read a first draft, part Excel spreadsheets,
Yeah.
almost like an office job.
Yeah, it's
Or
not
almost
glamorous,
like laying
is it?
out a
Right.
play,
Pretty
making
much,
sure
yeah,
that the three
yeah.
characters were on stage, that
Exactly,
the audience
yeah.
would have forgotten.
Yeah.
So we've got Star Trek, and we've got
Mhm.
performance, and your husband writes plays and music
Right.
and dance, and we've got your fascination with fame. The next thing that I need to ask about is comics.
Right.
Let's talk. Where did
Sure,
that-
yeah. I don't have a really deep background in comics. I wish I did, but when I was a kid, I really loved Calvin and Hobbes. And there's that whole. So Calvin had this alter ego, Spaceman Stiff, which I read about in the book a little bit. And I went without reading those comic books for probably 10 or 15 years, but something about the Spaceman Stiff sections always stuck with me. They were really funny, but they were also beautiful. There was these incredible skies, like this wash of orange and pink watercolor and two moons, and then this tiny little bubble spacecraft. moving over the surface of the planet. They were just wonderful. So I think it's fair to say that's a pretty big influence on Station 11, the comic book within the novel. And then a few years ago, a friend of mine came to visit, and as a sort of parting gift, he left a copy of one of the Sandman books, Neil Gaiman's collaboration with somebody. And I think I've read it 4 times. I just found it really beautiful, and it was such a compelling form, and it was something I knew I wanted to write about. And a technical challenge with having a book that moves so much in time between these different time points is how to kind of keep it feeling cohesive. So I wanted an object that could be carried through from one timeline to the other, and pretty quickly the comic book in the novel came to serve that.
How many copies of Station 11 do we have to sell to get your publisher to make Dr. 11?
That is a great question. I think like half the publishing house is in the front row. Yeah, I'll ask.
I'm just saying.
I mean, there is a page that exists.
It doesn't have to be self-published forever.
It's true.
We
could make that happen.
Picked up before pre-apocalypse. We could
if any graphic artists want to call my agent, we can make this happen.
Everybody should tweet that right now. But no, it was like that.
I would love to see it, seriously. It
So would I.
Amazing. Yeah.
I know.
Yeah. That would be so cool.
It was a great, and that conversation in the book about comics, like the love shown through, and I'm so happy because I do. One of the things about the timelessness that you do, like, I love that conversation stayed with me. I can only imagine that maybe not. I don't know.
No, I don't think anybody asked me to check it out.
Okay.
It was always there. Thank you.
And so that I'm trying. Basically, it's a very plot-driven book, so I'm trying to stay away from the plot like a little bit.
Right.
So I don't want to give away. I mean, it's all these characters tie in so intricately. So I'm focusing more on like the objects and the things.
Right. Okay.
So I'm going to go to the next thing. Tattoo.
Right.
Do
Just
you
an
have-
interest, obviously.
Right. But like, let me say, I can't die from tetanus getting these now. So, but like,
Okay.
do you have an interest in tattoos? Do you have any?
I have no tattoos.
Okay.
No. I have a little sister who has full sleeves, and yeah, they're beautiful, but I've never wanted one myself.
Can I ask why you wanted to include them in the book, or you just thought it was
In the
fun?
book, well, they serve a sort of function in the book, which is pretty dark, which is, this is a post-apocalyptic world, and people have been forced to do things that they would never have to, otherwise the world hadn't ended. And a few of them, over time, have been forced into situations where they've had to kill somebody. And when that's happened, they get a commemorative tattoo, just like a knife or an arrow or something small. And the reason for it, it seemed to me that these were acts that would haunt them, and that they'd want to memorialize, I guess is the word, in some way. By no means celebratory. It's you want to go through life with as few of those tattoos as possible. And yeah, it just struck me as something that might arise in a sort of changed culture following class.
And there were a lot of dark moments
Yeah.
in this book. When you set out to do post-apocalyptic, did you know that you wanted it to be like this violence thing? Did you have this end game in mind?
Kind of the opposite. I really didn't want to write the road. I really liked that book, but yeah.
You didn't.
I thank you. Yeah.
You were
yeah, there's
basically
no
like,
cannibalism whatsoever.
shit was dark for a year,
Right.
and she forgot a lot of it.
Yeah, and then we got through it.
And then Shakespeare.
Yeah, which is actually why the post-apocalyptic sections are 15 to 20 years out. Is I didn't really want to write about the horror and mayhem that I assume would actually happen immediately following the collapse. But maybe 15 or 20 years later, you're starting to rebuild some kind of society, and there's some tolerance or even desire for travel Shakespearean theater company, for example. So, yeah, I really didn't want to write a horror novel. That was something I was trying to keep in mind. But then also, you can't make it too light, and the world's ended. So.
Well, and it is. It's almost this clash of mini civilizations.
Right,
It's
exactly.
like instead of these giant countries, it's just everything has become so
Town
much
to town.
small.
Right.
Could you explain, maybe for those that haven't read the book, like kind of what this setup in the post-apocalyptic world is? If you got
Yeah,
some-
sure. So what I was imagining is that in the absence of a central government, we would probably organize ourselves in terms of small communities. So, one town might be run by an elected council. The town 20 miles down the street might be run by a religious, fanatic cult leader. And yeah, there are clashes that happen there. And then the symphonies moving between them. And in the sane, reasonable towns, they can perform in exchange for goods. And then the violent towns, of course, you're trying to avoid them. So
There's
that was the
this-
landscape.
There's this beautiful moment. The book it's different sections and from different viewpoints. There's this beautiful this one person is basically trying to do oral histories, and it keeps
Right.
coming back to this. He's made a newspaper basically, post-apocalyptic press, and he talks to her and she says, some towns you come back to, but sometimes you just try to get through.
Right. And sometimes some towns change rapidly. It's an elected council that you pass through, and then 2 years later, that's fallen apart, and it's some horror show.
Did you grow up in a small town?
I grew up in a small island. It was, I know, right? It was the same size and shape as Manhattan with 1,000 people.
Oh, I've heard that somewhere.
Yeah, I think I repeated that in like 12 interviews. I apologize.
No, I didn't know. Wait, so did you go? That's the island.
That's the island. Yeah, that's
Is that where you
Delano
grew up for
Island.
real?
It's called Denman Island in real life. That's a very fictionalized version.
I like that you switched like 3 letters.
I switched 3 letters. It's the thing with post-apocalyptic books. It's like, are you really going to kill off your hometown? It's really it's hard to do. So, yes, I had to fictionalize it a little bit because it was hard to write.
Have people in your hometown read the book yet?
I don't know.
Oh man.
Yeah, I have no family there anymore, so it's.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Have you gone back?
Once or twice. My family moved to Vancouver Island, to a town there, which is bigger and easier to live on, more services.
Sorry, I got distracted. Now I'm at. That's like pretty.
Yeah, sure.
Like I just
Right.
wanted to. The other thing that seems to be a focus is the air traffic.
Right.
So I was just wondering, is that just like you were picturing what it would be not to have planes? Or?
I think that was part of it. I guess I was also touring a lot for my previous book because I was writing the first draft, so I spent a lot of time in airports. Yeah, and that might have seeped into it a little bit. It's also, to get personal again for a second, my whole family's on the west coast of British Columbia, and I'm here. So when I imagine a world without air travel, I'm imagining never see my family again. So it has a really deep kind of personal resonance to think about that. And it's also just really fascinating to think about that if all of the infrastructure and systems around us were to disappear and there were no air travel, to imagine how intensely local the world would become. That it really would be a matter of villages, I think, really. Like, even the other end of New York City would probably be a further land than you'd go to. And because we're so much the opposite of that now. We hear these news stories instantly from around the world, and you can cross the Atlantic in a few hours. It was just fascinating to me to consider the opposite, the kind of shrinking in geography.
And you do have that in the presidency, though. The guy who's about to be named, he's talking about how he's really trying to focus on the news more.
Right.
And like,
Right.
well,
Yeah.
did you talk to anybody who did paparazzi stuff? Sorry. The character used to be paparazzi, and then I believe he was a journalist for a hot second.
Yeah, yeah.
And then
He's trying to turn his life around, but he's
Yeah.
studying to be an EMT, as the book opens. I didn't talk to paparazzos. I did read some of their blogs, and I was reading about the industry a little bit.
You seem to get real empathy, even as
Yeah.
he was a scumbag.
He was kind of a scumbag.
Yeah.
I felt bad for the guy. I make bad choices sometimes. He was so unhappy in his work.
Take the wrong photographs.
I take the wrong photographs, exactly. Yeah.
I just want to, I don't know. It was, for me, like it was just, it had everything. Not to steal Emma Straub's quote, but like there
Thank you.
was
I appreciate that.
moments where you felt like you were reading like a Hollywood scene, and there are moments where it's just
Right.
like this post-apocalyptic. And then there are moments when they're on stage, when there's performance. Did you study Shakespeare? Did you read a lot of Shakespeare?
I didn't read a lot of Shakespeare. I'd like to read more.
It was just like Lear and Midsummer's Night's Dream, and you're like, yeah.
Yeah, thank God that's not. Yeah, I read Hamlet, which I think was in the first draft, and then I cut it out. I read A Winter's Tale. Yeah, I've read a few of them over the years. I'm by no means an expert.
You're not, you didn't go to PhD.
I did not, no. I read about his life a little bit. That was fascinating. That was writing about him.
Like what?
Like, he was so intimately touched by the plague, which I hadn't realized. And it was really kind of fascinating to realize there were these parallels between Elizabethan England and the post-pandemic world. That, the obvious one is that in his time, theater was a matter of these small traveling companies going from town to town. And then also the way that plague would have affected their lives in Elizabethan England. It just, the bubonic plague swept across England over and over again. And Shakespeare lost 3 siblings and his only son. And so I realized as I was reading about that I was reading about lives of people who I think would have been perhaps somewhat haunted by their memories of plagues in the recent past. And that was exactly what I was writing about in this fiction, set in the world after a flu pandemic. So, yeah, it just became more and more natural that they'd be a company that performed Shakespeare. And, yeah, it was just, it was interesting to read about. I hadn't known much about his life with him.
The other thing, the fascination with fame, but there's also the closeness to fame. You're talking about these people's lives and how they're affected.
Right.
Especially also the moving around and luck versus not lucking where you are and trying to get close to the people that you love or care about or even or just burying. But Clark,
Yes.
was there? He was a fascinating character to me because he was basically this best friend. He's the best friend of one of the important characters in the book, and he's a very famous movie star. And you can feel his closeness to fame and how that affects him. And I was just wondering if that came from somewhere.
No, I just made it up.
That's
No,
fiction, you said.
Fiction. Yeah. Yeah, it just struck me as an interesting aspect because if you were very famous, that probably would strain your friendships. Maybe inevitably. It's just kind of sad to think about. But yeah.
Relationships, basically.
Relationships.
Avoid post-plague apocalypse and avoid fame.
Yeah. I think that's a sound strategy.
I'd love to open it up to the floor if other people have questions. It's a key time.
Yeah.
Hi. I love that.
Let's see.
I love that list about just talk about all the things that went away, and all this uncertainty there is in the world. And I wonder how important kind of thinking about what went away was for you to sort of come up with what's really important in people's lives.
It's interesting. Yeah, I guess everything that falls away is external. You can live without electricity and Facebook. Yeah, that was something that I was thinking about as I wrote the book, about what remains after everything's lost. And it's really memory, friendship, and love, and your work, whatever it is that you loved, that you can do without electricity, I guess. Performing Shakespeare, for example. Yeah.
I just want to jump in on the list question too. It was the other thing. It seemed like you were playing with was form, and so you have like this oral narrative form almost, and you have these different forms.
Right.
And one of them is obviously I work for BuzzFeed, so lists really supposed to.
Let's see.
And it is as a way to move time. And first off, killer. You
Thank
ever
you.
want to write lists? Let me know.
Okay.
I know because they were impeccable. Like it was a beautiful way to get the story to where it needed to be. But this is more of a shallow question, which is you actually read from the section, basically just talking about what's on Facebook. It kind of felt like a list of things on Facebook you could do without.
I could absolutely do without
Yeah,
it. There's
actually.
relationship status updates and the photographs, burritos. Yeah.
It was good. The lunch. That's
Right.
call
I
building.
don't get it. I just, yeah.
It was beautiful, this work. Were you actually just going through? Did you write? Was there 2 tabs? Were you like writing that? Going back to.
Going back to Facebook. No, but I do have a long-standing frustration with photographs of lunch in my Facebook feed. I just, like, no matter how much I like you, I don't care about your burrito. That's really what it comes down to.
That's how I feel about babies.
So we can both do without Facebook. Right, that's what I'm getting.
Are there audience questions? I was just wondering why you chose flu as like all the things that could end the world in today's world. Like,
It's just so horribly plausible. was the reason. You know, I was thinking like, you could make it a, I don't know, a nuclear holocaust or something, but then it immediately becomes a very political novel, which wasn't really something that I was interested in, going in that direction. Or you could come up with some devastating new disease, some horrible airborne mutation of Ebola or something, but why? You know, when there's flu, it's yeah, and there's such a, also because most of us have had the flu, we know how horrible it feels, so I thought it might have a particular horrible resonance for readers.
One question I had. You have a great visual eye when it comes to sort of performative aspects of things. There's obviously the theater element. You have a background in dance. But it felt very, I don't know, there's kind of like some film influence, in my opinion, for it too. Do you have any favorite directors or films that have inspired some of your novels, or in particular, Station Line?
Oh, that's a good question. Yeah, I think maybe 28 Days Later could have inspired a little bit. I really love that movie. Yeah, I have a hard time thinking of other specific movies, but I do sort of see the scene as I'm writing it, and I'm imagining what it looks like. And I guess that's just the way my brain works. I'm thinking of it visually, and I guess that's what comes through in the program.
Yeah, the truck caravan thing was just like.
Thank you.
Like, yeah. Like, it was, I kind of wanted to live in the. I
In
mean,
one of the
don't get me
pickup
wrong,
trucks
stuff was
that-
going really bad.
Right.
It's getting weird.
Yeah.
St. Deborah
By the water, it's a bad
but-
town.
But overall,
Right.
it kind of didn't seem like a terrible place.
You could live there.
You showed like humanity was proud,
Right.
but mainly cool trucks.
Mainly cool
Horses.
trucks. Not the horses. Yeah.
I felt similarly. I was just kind of like, this is like a cool mobile summer camp. I would not mind it either.
But with no antibiotics.
Any other audience questions this evening? No? We are just coming to the end of our time. I'd like to extend a very warm thanks to both Emily and Isaac for joining us tonight. Thank you.